Good morning and welcome to Morning Movie News, where today I have 3 stories for you that illustrate that Hollywood is still a very tough place to earn a living. Sometimes people's own fault, right? Prejudices still exist. Things are not getting better, despite what happened with Exodus. Yes, I'm talking about whitewashing, and our first 2 stories have to deal with that. Whitewashing, not only when it comes to movies, but also coverage of movie news. And then the third story is actually quite a charming / sad story about how Hollywood can take you in, make you a god of Hollywood, chew you up then, and spit you out. But yet you still cling on for dear life. So yes, it's a very interesting story today, and I think there's a little bit of sympathy all around, because I feel bad, for instance, for Lionsgate for spending so much money on Gods of Egypt, only to see it pretty much perish out of the gate. But first, before we talk about that, I want to talk about what happened with the Hollywood Reporter yesterday, because I woke up this morning and I got a tweet from BTT viewer Edward Nigma, and when the Riddler asks you to do something, you do it. But Edward Nigma, in all seriousness, tweeted me and said, "Please, oh please, cover HollywhiteReporter." And I was like, "What's HollywhiteReporter?" So I looked up that hashtag on Twitter, and lo and behold, it was a Hollywood Reporter story that I had seen yesterday about inequality and pay for women in Hollywood. They had this big cover story. The Hollywood Reporter is trying to be very consumer friendly. It started out as a business-to-business magazine. For those of you who are wondering, in publication, one of the distinctions is B2B, business to business. You can be consumer to consumer, or you can be business to consumer. There really isn't any consumer to business, and perhaps sometimes that's the problem with Hollywood, although I guess internet message boards serve that purpose. But anyway, the Hollywood Reporter is trying to be, headline friendly to the consumer, right? So they do a lot of tabloid reporting, I guess you could say, woven in with some pretty good investigative reporting in the industry. So anyway, they really stuck their foot in their mouth with this one. So they got a bunch of women together, and I'm sure they were very proud of this story, and were like, "Oh, what a scoop! Jennifer Lawrence, Kate Blanchett, Kate Winslet, Jane Fonda, Brie Larson, Carey Mulligan." But you'll note that and maybe you won't note, that I am listing a lot of white actresses, and there were no actresses of color included in this round table, which people, I didn't know this was going to get Twitter attention, and I'm wondering how the Hollywood Reporter feels to get this hashtag, HollywhiteReporter. But I was surprised, because when I started to read the article, I was like, let's see what they have to say, because I'm interested in inequality in Hollywood pay. I'm interested in all Hollywood stories, but being a woman, I take a special interest in this. And what I took away from this story, I didn't even finish it, was because everyone came off so entitled and like such a jerk, right? Like, I was like, wow, this is like the worst story. Like, if people didn't feel sorry for women before about not getting paid, equally to their male counterparts, they certainly aren't going to now, because these women all sound like jerks. I'm going to put a link actually in the video description to this article, because it has to be read to be believed. For instance, you have Kate Blanchett saying, "I don't even really want to be an actor anymore, but they keep pulling me back in with great opportunities, but I wish I could quit." And Jane Fonda's like, "I didn't want to be an actress ever. My father didn't like it very much, and I wanted to be a secretary, but I got fired being a secretary, so I decided to become an actress." And then even Jennifer Lawrence was like, "Yeah, I just fell into it, and thank God I could use it as like some kind of therapy." And I'm like, you all suck. You should be paid nothing. This is ridiculous. So I actually scrolled down to the comment section, because I was like, oh, I want to see these women get it, because they are coming off like jerks. And lo and behold, I was really surprised, and I guess, it's totally warranted, to see all of these comments about the whitewashing of the article, and I was like, whoa, that blew up in their faces. And then to lo and behold see this morning that it blew up on Twitter, even more so, I think was very damaging for the Hollywood Reporter. And we'll see if they continue to make that mistake. My guess is, what I suspect, is that they probably felt that, they didn't want to cloud the conversation with, well, is it because you're a woman, or is it because of your ethnicity? But I think that's not a good enough excuse, because pay inequality is pay inequality, right? And they're like, well, we're only taking on gender pay inequality right now. Inequality for ethnicities will have to wait. And it's like, no, just if you're having the pay inequality discussion right now, let's just talk about it, in broad strokes. Let's just cover all our bases, because we don't want to keep revisiting this. And you really, to some degree, can't keep revisiting it. So, you should try and get as many people, into the equal pay, box as possible. So, Hollywood Reporter, and I think that Hollywood, entertainment coverage in general tends to do this, right? And they've created like we talk about it all the time. You guys often take issue with it, black film, quote unquote. And I think that, that was important to begin with because everybody, in the black community had to give everybody else opportunities and they had to prove themselves at the box office. But this is clearly, something that needs to be broken down. But again, that's not, then you, I guess this is it keeps going. It shouldn't just be with black talent. We should try and do different ethnicities as well. Because, every time we discuss that, I think rightfully so, a lot of people go, well, what about Latino talent? And what about Asian talent? And I think this is all very slowly happening. We're going to segue into the next story in just a moment. But for some people, it's not happening fast enough. And maybe it won't happen if people don't keep hitting people hard when they make the mistake of not doing it. But I'm curious to know what you think. I think that pay inequality is a big problem. I've said this many times. I always believe in every fiber of my being, in every aspect of life, that things should be a meritocracy. You get paid what you're worth, in terms of how much press can you get a project, and how many tickets can you sell, and can you get at any awards consideration. That's the value of talent. You would think it would be how good of a product can you deliver, but unfortunately that's not on the list. I mean, it is, but to the extent of selling tickets and getting awards, it kind of factors into that. But, I think the Hollywood Reporter did make a mistake. And, I also think that, for instance, I think Jennifer Lawrence spearheaded it. And I think that Jennifer Lawrence probably reached out to people she knows to get them to do the article. And it was kind of get your friends to do it. Oh, this is so exciting. I'm going to call up my buddies. So I think also you're seeing that, you're not seeing a lot of camaraderie in Hollywood across ethnicity lines, right? Apparently maybe these actresses aren't friends with any actresses of color, so that's why they didn't get the call. But I don't know, call up Viola Davis and be like, you're an Emmy winner. What are you getting paid? All right, so we'll see. Shonda Rhimes, though, although, interestingly enough, Shonda Rhimes was recently asked about the glass ceiling in Hollywood in terms of gender and ethnicity, and she was like, I don't see one. And everyone, and the journalist who was interviewing her was like, do you think that's insensitive to people who say there is one? And Shonda Rhimes was like, well, I think because I don't perceive there being a ceiling, there isn't a ceiling. I just don't pay attention to any limitations. And I was like, you can't argue with that, nor Shonda Rhimes' success. And I'm sure Shonda Rhimes is paid quite a bit. All right, so anyway, let's move on to the other story of the day. And this is where there is some more whitewashing going on, once again with ancient Egypt. Of course, everybody was very upset with Exodus. Exodus totally imploded. It was a PR nightmare for everyone involved, and then it didn't do well at the box office because people were upset about whitewashing the characters. Now you have to understand that Hollywood has been whitewashing ancient Egypt and ancient Rome and et cetera, for forever, since the beginning of making movies. And that's why everybody in ancient Egypt usually had a British accent, right? It's just something that Hollywood has done. And for 99% of the time they've been making movies, everyone not only was okay with it, but they loved it. These movies did really well. Now, this is only recent, and I think it has to do not only with more purchase power at the box office from other ethnicities besides white in the United States, but also the globalization of the box office, right? Suddenly Hollywood movies don't just play in America, and with cinephiles, pockets of cinephiles across the globe, they're major releases all over the world. So people are getting more and more upset with whitewashing. And it's, especially when you have the internet allows people to voice their displeasure in a way that, with a loudness they never have before, much to Hollywood's, chagrin. And as I said, they spent so much money. You can see the money dripping off the screen with Gods of Egypt, but it seems like they just flushed their money down the toilet. Same with Exodus. Both are, by the way, very handsome productions. And I think the Gods of Egypt looks good in some areas. So it just makes it all the more a shame that they didn't cast it a little bit more, ethnically correct to the region, because maybe the film then therefore would have done quite well. So here's the real question now. And I think the real issue is going to be who's going to step up to bat first in Hollywood and see if this is true. If they were to make an ethnically correct film that was cast correctly, would everyone go to see it? Would it still make hundreds of millions of dollars, with Middle Eastern actors or, Indian actors or Egyptian actors, the people of the correct descent in that region? And I don't think you have to get, bullseye, but you have to be in the region. Because, again, we just talked about what an actor or talent needs to bring to the table. Star power, by selling tickets or awards, etc. And publicity. Those are the three. So they need, and I think that they're going to have to, if they're going to try and get a diverse film that's correctly cast, there obviously aren't a lot of, actors of the right ethnicity that are draws in Hollywood right now. So they're going to have to get star power behind the camera, and then they're going to have to introduce new talent in front of the camera. Maybe bring over some Bollywood talent, see if that works out. Bollywood films, as we've been seeing, are consistently cracking the top 10. So, see if that can work out, right? Now, of course, I know that Indian actors are not correct for Egypt, but I think, again, you want to get close enough and you want to try and get something that's going to work. I mean, let's try and coax Hollywood to do things correctly by, baby steps. But this is not a baby step at all. This is just like firmly entrenched in the old ways of Hollywood. And so again, I'll be interested to see how this movie performs at the box office. I think it's probably going to just not work at all, and I think that this is another tough lesson for Hollywood. This probably obviously was in production. I believe it was actually when all the Exodus stuff hit the fan, so it was too late for them to change it. And also I think you look at movies like 300 and stuff, and like they had actually Gerard Butler in that movie. So I think this is relatively new again, that Hollywood, the audiences are expecting authenticity in the casting, and so I think that Hollywood is you have to remember that these movies are made so far in advance that they're always like a year or two behind the curve in terms of what audiences are demanding. So you might see it come up soon, but then everybody better go and see it, or there's going to be a real problem in terms of fixing this in the long term. But I'm curious. I know a lot of you asked me to cover that trailer. I'm curious what you think of it. Chadwick Boseman is in the film, but he's only there for a split second in the trailer, and he just looks so ashamed to be there. All right, so those are the first two stories of the day dealing with, again, whitewashing in Hollywood. We're going to move on now to that sad, charming story that I told you about. So Val Kilmer took to Facebook the other day, and he confirmed that he was going to be in Top Gun 2. And he did a real long, rambling quote. And he talked about like how there are some projects you just don't say no to. I think he really wanted to frame this historically for his career and in Hollywood. And he said, there are some things you just don't say no to. Gene Hackman is starring. Francis Ford Coppola, or he said Francis Coppola is directing. And he said Top Gun 2 with Jerry Bruckheimer and, like Tom Cruise and stuff. That's one of those things you just don't say no to. And even though we're so sad that Tony Scott is no longer with us, we're going to go forward and do this in his memory because he was such a great guy. And I'm so excited to be Iceman again in Top Gun 2. So everybody picked this up and it started to trend on Twitter. And so Iceman, Val Kilmer, had to really go back there and he had to qualify himself throughout the day. First, he was like, well, Gene Hackman and Francis Ford Coppola aren't involved with Top Gun 2. I was just, trying to put it in perspective, and that's why I included their names. But so they're not involved. And then later in the day, he had to qualify it again, saying, well, look, being offered a role is different from doing a role. And I that's a very weird qualification to make. I suspect that his agent was like, well, since you said you're already doing it, so much for us asking for more money and trying to bargain because you already said you want to do it. So he had to qualify it. I think that's why he did it. But then he added something that was just so charming at the end of his Facebook post. And he said, I just got carried away because it was such a wonderful call with my agent. And I was like, Val Kilmer, you're making me so sad. Because I think clearly Val Kilmer was like, it was so nice just for a moment to be back at the top of my game. Because, obviously Iceman was one of his most iconic roles. And a lot of people really, took to him on Facebook, and because it's the internet and people are mean, and apparently they were like, you're too old and fat to be Iceman, and he was like, sorry, I'm 165 now, so clearly he's like, I've lost a lot of weight, so I was like, good for you, Val Kilmer, and then he was like, 55 is the new 50, and I was like, leave Val Kilmer alone. And I really would like to say that Val Kilmer actually happens to be one of the first celebrity interviews I ever did for MacGruber. And he was so charming and so nice and so much fun and so good off the cuff that he's forever has a special place in my heart. Just a really kind person, a little loopy, a little weird, but, most people in Hollywood are. And I think that he's just he's not only a fun person, but I think an incredibly kind person. So I hope that Top Gun 2 works out. I hope that he and his agent can make a great deal. I hope he gets a nice paycheck, because I'm sure Val Kilmer doesn't get a lot of paychecks these days, although I'm sure his residuals from Top Gun are still coming in. Residuals, if you're not aware of what that is an actor gets paid dividends if they're like one of the stars forever based on what the movie's doing in the ancillary market from rentals and sales and being sold on TV, etc. But anyway, Val Kilmer, awesome guy, new to social media, and I think his very clear excitement for returning to not only the Top Gun, it's going to be a franchise, but to return to that, but also to the heyday of his career is just quite charming. All right, so let's get on to today's question, which is from Anthony Leach. And Anthony was very kind himself trying to get this question answered. He was very nice. Anthony Leach, regular BTT viewer, so I'm very happy to be able to answer his question. And he has a very interesting one about actors, so that kind of ties in. So he says, "Hi, Grace. I always enjoy watching your show, either on my way to class or coming from it. I hope you had a good day at class today, or you're going to. My question is, I always hear people talking about different types of actors, such as talking about Gene Wilder being a great character actor. I actually wouldn't qualify Gene Wilder as a character actor. I'm surprised you've heard that. But character actors, we'll talk about that in a moment. That's the question, basically. But then he says, but Daniel Day-Lewis is a great method actor. Can you please explain to me what the difference is between these two kinds of acting? And also, are there more than just these two, as I only ever hear about these two methods?" Well, I think you only hear about those two methods because, and there are some more, but I think those are the only two types you hear about because when it comes to the craft of acting, those are really the two. So a character actor is someone who always plays like a good supporting role and is like a chameleon, right? Like Lon Chaney was one of the first great character actors. And he was like a literal chameleon because he was using so much makeup and prosthetics. Andy Serkis, great modern day character actor. And there are other people who are character actors. Like you could say Bob Hoskins was a great character actor. Edward G. Robinson was a great character actor. So these are often supporting actors who take on supporting roles and bring a lot of character to the movie. They're either someone who can change a lot, like they can take on like lots of different types of characters, or they're someone who are just, a character actor, I think, is a very kind way to say not a leading actor. Now, sometimes character actors become leading actors, particularly today, because Hollywood is a lot about breaking stereotypes because audiences demand that these days. But a character actor, historically, is someone who brings a lot of panache to a role, very vibrant, but isn't, your classic leading man or leading lady. So that's what a character actor is. As for Daniel Day-Lewis, what a method actor is, now a leading man and a leading lady is our other part, but so let's go but method actor. A method actor is someone who disappears into a role, but as a lead, right? Sometimes that's a character actor, but I guess a character actor, their transformation's a little more surfacey, a little bit more showy. But a method actor is someone who, will disappear into the role. You'll hear things like, oh, the whole time they were on set, they kept that accent. Or like what Jared Leto is doing in Suicide Squad. He was the Joker every time we saw him. We never met Jared Leto. That's considered method acting. So that's when someone disappears into the role and actually will do certain things that the role has to do, outside of shooting, right? Like Leonardo DiCaprio, usually not a method actor, but saying, oh, I ate meat even though I'm a vegetarian for The Revenant. They're like, oh, that's method acting. So that's what those are. But then the other types of acting are, and also, by the way, these are not black and white distinctions. It's a gray scale when it comes to how you categorize actors and their performances. But in Hollywood, another category is leading man, leading lady. And that is someone who always does the exact same thing, but audiences just like it, right? For instance, Paul Newman has a really famous quote, and he said, and sometimes I can't bring in any audience at all, but if you put me in the right role, in the right movie, I'm priceless. And I think that's what a leading actor is. That, like, for instance, Channing Tatum right now is a good leading actor, right? Johnny Depp is an interesting situation. He is a leading actor, but he's also, I think, very much a good example of a character actor, right? But then I'm trying to give you different, Anthony, I'm trying to give you different categories for actors. And then another one is ingenue, which is typically used to describe young female actresses. Often Hollywood always needs an ingenue, often to put opposite an older actor. But an ingenue is just they need like a fresh young face to put in there, and there's a whole bunch of publicity goes along with it. Like, oh, a hot new star, and very few of those ingenues actually go on to have careers. It's very difficult. But Hollywood has a constant need for young actresses to be ingenues, but not as big a need for established seasoned actresses, which is why so many of them disappear. And they have a lot more demand for leading men than leading ladies. At least they have recently, but that seems to be changing. But then anyway, there's also, I think, pre-movie star is a category I would make up, which is almost like a male ingenue. And that's like someone they're hoping to groom to be a new leading man. For instance, Brenton Thwaites, who is the young star of Gods of Egypt, who plays the street urchin, Aladdin type role. He is someone who is like a male ingenue. They're trying to hopefully make him into a leading man, but it's not going so well. Ryan Gosling, for instance, is a great example of someone who wants to be a character actor, but gets leading man roles, and then tries to do character acting within those lead roles, and then just create something that audiences don't know how to categorize. So these distinctions are important not only from a business perspective and an awards perspective, but also from a PR perspective and how audiences perceive you and how Hollywood sells you. The Hollywood machine is set up to work very specifically, and it's hard to break those chains of career. And Hollywood is like a little bit of a factory, and so it's hard to jump from assembly line to assembly line. So Anthony, I hope that clears up your question a little bit. Again, as I said, it's not a black and white situation, it's a grayscale, but I hope that gives you a little bit more insight into how Hollywood views performances. So thank you so much for your question. Thank you everybody for tuning in today. Please write down below what you think of today's top 3 stories and that viewer question, anything you'd like to see covered tomorrow, and any questions that you might have. Thanks for watching. Bye.